And hello, darlings. How are you all? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, goodness gracious, wherever you may happen to be. Welcome back to me. Uh, Whatever. Hi, I'm Tad. I'm going to be reading from the Witchwood Crown tonight. Assuming that everything is working properly. Look, my microphone's on. That's a good start. What else is going on here? Let me see. Yes, haha. Looks like people are showing up and checking in. Hello, there's Carol, Penny, Wouter, and Kristen, and Jill, Pace Brunker, and Penny, and various others. I see it's going that direction just to make it complicated. So anyway, wait, it's saying no comments, but they're obviously comments. Who haven't I said hello to yet? Dirk. Hello, Dirk. And Iris. Hello, hello. Anyway, I have no idea why it's doing what it's doing, but it's doing what it's doing and it's going to keep on doing it. So I'm going to try not to worry about it too much. Anyway, so I'm in a fairly cheerful mood today, mostly because I got a cortisone shot in my wrist, and although the inflammation's not gone or anything, it's definitely better. Unfortunately, I've also got a band-aid that's stuck to the hairy part of my arm. Well, my whole arm is hairy, and I dare not take it off because it'll rip half the hair there off, and it will be extremely painful. So I am imprisoned by my own cowardice. I've had it on for 2 days. I keep waiting for it to drop off, and somehow, this is like when you want a band-aid to stay on, it falls off within 5 seconds. But if you don't want it to stay on and you want it to drop off, it just stays and stays. And this one, it's like they put it on with super glue or something. Anyway, but I am in a slightly more cheerful state of mind because I'm not in pain all day. Which I have to say, given the choice between being in pain all day and not being in pain all day, call me a maverick, call me a wild outside the box thinker, but I will usually opt for the not being in pain all day thing. So anyway, I'm in a good mood about that. I'm hoping I can get back to full-time typing again, which I literally have not been able to do since September or so, maybe even earlier than that. And it's driving me crazy. When I had my shoulder operation a couple of years ago, just before COVID, so more than a couple of years ago now, I had a process whereby I could not do anything for several months before I got it diagnosed. And then I got it diagnosed and they said, okay, we have to go through this process. You have to have x-rays and MRIs and all that stuff. So then I did all that, which took another month or so. And then they said, okay, we've got you scheduled for surgery for like 5 months up the road. So then I went in finally and had the surgery after I'd already been going through this for about 8 months. And then, of course, after surgery, especially fairly major surgery where they like redo your entire shoulder with wire, which is what happened. Then I had another 5 or 6 months where I couldn't do anything. And I was going nuts. I am not. As I kept saying to Deborah at the time, I'm not a consumer. And of course, I am a consumer. I mean, that was silly. But what I was reacting to is that I have to make things. That's like a super important part of who I am and how I keep myself from going crazy and killing 40 people on a crosstown bus with an umbrella or something. I always say umbrella because I would never carry a weapon onto a bus. But if I had an umbrella and I was going crazy, I might kill 40 people with the umbrella. Anyway, so it was a long, long stretch, and I'm hoping this has been a few months already. And also when you get to be a mature gentleman like myself, you're much more conscious of the fact that you don't literally have forever. I lost 2 parents in the last year and something, and they had good long lives, but I mean, you don't have forever in this world, and I'm not waiting to get my rewards in the sweet by and by. I want to do whatever I can do while I'm here. And one of the things I want to do is write a lot more stories and make a lot more things. So the prospect of more and more months waiting to be able to type is just agonizing. So wish me luck. Fingers crossed that starting on tomorrow or Monday, I will be able to sit down and put in a full day's work writing again. Because I've just lost 3 months I'll never get back in terms of, I mean, I did a lot of thinking. I did a lot of book thinking, as I call it. So that may have improved some of the product I eventually come up with. But as to, the fact of not, and I've said this before, so forgive me for going back over old territory, but the whole great thing about writing is you can actually count the pages and see that you've done something. And when you work at home and you really make your own hours and you do all this stuff, there are times when it creeps up on you that maybe you're not doing anything at all. Maybe you're just living a very complicated form of not doing anything. You're just being a kind of glorified bum. Now, obviously, over the years, I've gotten a bunch of books written, so I'm doing something. But there still are those moments, where you kind of go like, I haven't done anything today. So when you're writing, the pages are actually there. You can look at them. It's like stacking boxes in a warehouse. It may not be the most elevating work, but at least you can see that you stacked a bunch of boxes. And in the same sense, writing may not save the world, but at least you can see that you've done something. So when all of your work for several months is just mental, and of course a lot of that kind of mental work means that you're changing things you'd already thought of. You're coming up with putatively better ideas, ostensibly superior ways to do things that you'd already thought about doing. So it doesn't really feel like you're working with a steady progression towards a goal. It feels like you're just kind of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, as the old expression goes. So a great cure for that is actually being able to write pages and see them. It was even better in the old days when you could put them next to your typewriter because they were hard copy paper. They'd come out of your typewriter and you'd put them next to it and you'd eventually make a pile. And it was satisfying. Although obviously there was always the possibility that they could suddenly catch fire or the roof could collapse on them or something. But then again, everybody who's ever lost, work in a computer knows that that is also a good way to lose material too. But anyway, so yeah, I miss that, and I've been missing that for months, and I have been barely sane for most of that time. Now, some might say I've been barely sane for most of my life. And that would be a fair assessment. But it's a different kind of barely sane when I can't write and I can't make things. And on top of everything else, I can't read books because I cannot hold a book without pain. And that's really frustrating. I'm almost doing all my reading now on electronic, on digital copies because I can set them on something and turn the pages without having to do a complicated thing like this, which, when your wrists are really screwed up is very difficult. And I don't have to hold a book up. So anyway, this long disquisition, this babbling rant by way of saying I'm in a good mood today because of having gotten a cortisone shot and feeling some relief already. Although it usually takes about a week for the cortisone to really kick in and you really learn what's going on with it. So, what else is going on? As far as I know, nothing tremendously exciting. Fortunately, none of that is tremendously bad either. We had Halloween, which was nice. It's the first time in years that I've actually been somewhere where we could have trick-or-treaters and hand out candy because Deborah and I have raised our kids in these kind of up in the hills, which is a lovely place to raise kids except for two things. It's hard for them to ride their bicycles. They don't have a neighborhood in the same way, and we don't get trick-or-treaters. I don't know why. I don't know why people wouldn't want to go up into the dark, unlit hills with no sidewalks and no street lights and go wandering around on these complicated properties late at night, wondering if there's anybody even living there, and then going up to the doors, which are often hundreds of feet away from the road, and knocking and hearing the distant barking of vicious hounds in the hopes of getting a fun-sized Snickers bar. I don't know why, but for some reason we never got trick-or-treaters where we used to live. And that's been true for most of the last 20 years or so. So this was the first time in years, now that we're down in the flats in my parents' suburban house, that we had Halloween. And of course, we're going to be moving out at the end of this year. So it's probably the last time we're going to have Halloween again for a while. So that was fun. I enjoyed it. We did it up right. I mean, I even carved a jack-o'-lantern. I haven't done that in years. So that was good. What else is going on? Just the usual stuff. Johnny the dog cannot quite get used to the concept of the suburbs. So as far as he's concerned, because he never or almost never had people within a few feet of him on the other side of a fence because of the way we had things set up in our other house, and will again when we move back into it. Johnny cannot get past the idea that anybody who walks past the house, which of course there's a sidewalk out there and a road, that anybody who walks past the house is in fact casing it for later burglary, or perhaps just to at some point introduce murder squirrels and night bunnies, or some of Johnny's other longtime nemesis. So of course he always runs up to the fence barking, woof, 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 woof. And although he is a complete pussycat, he really is the cowardly lion. He's scary if you don't know. He's a good sized dog. He's an 80-pound dog that's part, retriever and part mastiff, and he's a good sized dog with a big deep chest and a big deep bark. And I'm hesitant to try to completely dissuade him, because first of all, he spent the entire rest of his life barking at things in an appropriate way, because he lived up in the country, up in the hills, and you should bark when something unfamiliar comes onto the property. But so he's a little troubled by that, and he's very troubled by having the house across the street from us is being remodeled rather extensively. It has been that way since before we moved in. So of course there's big trucks going in and out, and big trucks are Johnny's other main nemesis, his bête noire, as it were, along with the murder squirrels and night bunnies and other things that the violence voles and other creatures that Johnny has long been at war with back at the old house. But here, the trucks are close and they're loud and they make backing noises, and it drives Johnny mad, and he barks at them, and he's very troubled by them, and he won't eat. It's, when you have a dog that won't eat because of trucks, you've got a problem, and especially when they're a constant occurrence outside the house. So you have to coax him into eating, and you have to wait till all the trucks have gone silent, and then you have to trick him by giving him something that he will take reflexively, like a piece of bologna. I've just realized how much of my life I spend dealing with extremely neurotic dogs. Anyway, okay, so what else did I want to say? I don't know. Life is so lifelike these days. Let me say hello to the people, some of the people who've showed up. See if I've got. Okay, so I've got John White. Hello, John. Matthew Dangerously. Hey, Matthew, my friend. How are you? Isaac. Hello, Isaac. Rick Davies. I wonder if that's my old friend, Rick Davies. Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy. Good to see you. I hope things are going at least a little better for you. Petra. Hello, hello. Ty. Good to see you. And I think I've said hello to many of the others here already. Kristen. Good to see you. Mark is checking in from Yorkshire. Nicole. Hello. Jenna Lee. Nice to have you with us. And Sandra K. Hello, hello. John White says, good morning from Portland. Hello, Portland. Nice place. I like Portland. We've almost recently lost two of our kids to Portland. They've all talked about moving to Portland. And not that we're stopping them. I mean, trust me, Deb and I are not saying, you may not move to Portland. But they waffle around where they want to move to. I like Portland. Portland's a great city. It's got a wonderful bookstore. That in and of itself is a huge mark of a class city for me. If you've got a good bookstore, you know, you're doing okay with me. Anyway, hello, hello, hello. Good to see all of you. And I think at this point, since I can't think of anything else useful that I need to say, okay, we did Halloween. I mentioned the cortisone shot, mentioned the sad sack dog. Deb's doing okay. She's snoozing away in the other room. She's having this ridiculous, oh, I'll mention this. Deborah's having a ridiculous struggle with Social Security, who she tried to contact, well, she contacted them to try to get eligible for, Medicare or something. And was told that her Social Security number was fraudulent, and not only that, that the guy strongly implied that she was like a criminal. And she's like, "What are you talking about? When?" He goes, "It was reported in 1995 as a fraudulent number." She's going, 1995. So you're telling me I've had a fraudulent number for 28 years or whatever, and you're now, when I'm applying for this Medicare thing, you're telling me that now that it's the wrong number. Anyway, it's like this ridiculous thing. We're going to have to hire a lawyer. It never ceases to amaze me how some people will, this is the kind of guy, this guy that we were dealing with, the Social Security, this is the kind of guy who is just such a bad temper and so unhappy with life that he like stiffs waiters and waitresses on tips and stuff, and I mean, just one of those people. And, it's one thing to say, well, we have a problem with your account or we have an issue with your application, but to say your account is fraudulent and you're a criminal, like first off the bat, that's just like meeting somebody for the first time at a party and going, "Hi, hey, you're ugly." I mean, it's like, come on. So anyway, poor Deb has been struggling with that and a number of other things. And she is my hero. She works so hard. She does all the business part of the family business while I do all the floating around, looking deep stuff. And she works so hard at that stuff. And I really admire that. I'm so grateful for it. And then every now and then she'll run into something like this or other things, where she's and not that I don't have to deal with bureaucracies too, of course, I do, but she does it even more than I do. And every now and then I just want to go knock somebody out. And I realize, I'm a pacifist by nature. I'm a peaceful person. I don't want to hurt people most of the time. But then somebody tells my wife that they're a criminal because there's some kind of weird glitch in their Social Security number. And I was like, I just want to go and whack somebody in the head, and just say, use a little humanity, thump. Be a decent human being, thump. Admit to yourself that maybe you're wrong, thump. Anyway, all right, that's enough. I have babbled enough. But anyway, other than that, Deborah is fine. So Hazel or any of her sisters, Hazel is my mother-in-law, Deb's mom. If Hazel's checking in or any of her sisters are checking in, she's fine. She's working hard as usual, and she's frustrated by bureaucracy, but she's okay. So there you go. All right. So I am going to go back to reading the Witchwood Crown. We are in the first introduction in the entire, well, not entirely, but pretty close to the first place in all of the Ostenard history of Ostenard that I has writ down in a paper book. We are in the one of the first times we've ever really seen the point of view of one of the Norns, one of the Hikedaya, who is Vieki, who is a High Magister, that is the highest official in his particular niche, High Magister of the Builders, and the Queen Utuku, the silver-masked Queen of the Norns, has just woken up after a 30-year sleep of sorts, which we will learn more about as the story goes on, of course. And he has been summoned to see her for the first time since he's been High Magister, obviously, and for the first time because she's been unconscious for 30 years. That actually sounds kind of nice. Anyway, So that's what I'm reading. And from here I continue with the Witchwood Crown. As they drew closer and closer to the palace, uneasy thoughts followed Vieki's every step like Shunyasu's beggars. That's a reference to a poem. He wanted to believe the summons was only part of ordinary protocol, the awakened queen summoning her highest ministers to an audience. But Vieki knew that he had greater crimes on his conscience than simply reading forbidden verses. He had colluded with his master Yarike and others to hide the things they had done while Utuku slept. What did it matter that they had acted for what they believed was the good of the Hikidaya people? The queen was not merely power. She was justice itself, the spirit and conscience of the race. How could he stand before her and not confess everything he had done or had even thought of doing? And if he did, how could his punishment be anything less than the end of honor and the utter destruction of himself and his family? Breathe and grow calm, Vieki se enduya, he urged himself. You are a noble of the Hikidaya and a child of the sacred garden. Even if death itself awaits you, do you wish to meet it like a cowering child? High Celebrant Zuneyabe stepped up to meet him as Vieki entered the palace's front gate. At first it seemed an honor that ancient Zuneyabe had come himself instead of sending an underling, but today the masked High Celebrant did not speak a word to Vieki, only made a ritual gesture of respect before signing for him to follow. Vieki showed no reaction to this ominous silence, of course, but only made a sign of assent and let the masked Zuneyabe lead him. A guide through the royal palace was always necessary for visitors, although that guide was seldom anyone so elevated. The Omeo Hamak was a maze in truth as well as in name, an unfathomably complicated puzzle of carved chambers and corridors, of slender bridges and apparently pointless staircases that led nowhere. A vast mystery that could never be untangled by chance alone. Only the highest celebrants knew their way to the heart of the labyrinth where the queen waited. As Venerable Zuneyabe led him deeper and deeper into the maze, Vieki could only think of who had summoned him, of who sat waiting at the heart of this web of stone. Utuku, the eldest, the mother of all, the heart of our race. The honorifics he had learned in childhood presented themselves to his fretful mind one after another. Wise beyond wisdom, strong beyond strength, immortal, all-seeing. At last they reached a corridor full of doors, each as plain and unprepossessing as the rest. Zuneyabe paused and laid his gloved hand on Vieki's sleeve. Now I leave you, said the High Celebrant, any expression hidden behind his ivory mask. He pointed to one of the doors. She waits. Zuneyabe made a courteous but abbreviated bow, then turned away. For perhaps the half-dozenth time since leaving his house, Vieki commended his soul to the garden. Begone, beggars, he commanded the useless plaguing thoughts as he opened the door and stepped through into shadows. Didn't the old heroes say that one is only truly alive when death is close? The darkness behind the door was not as complete as he had first thought. A single torch burned at the far end of a corridor of featureless stone, above a door as simple as the one he had just entered. For a moment he mistook the row of unmoving figures on either side of the hallway for statues, but then he saw they wore the unadorned, face-hiding helmets and snowy white armor of Utuku's personal guard, the Queen's Teeth. These were no stone carvings. Unmoving silence was their ordinary state. Vieki's father, Urayeki, was a court artist, always sober and correct with his noble subjects, but more high-spirited at home with his family, and on occasion almost fanciful. When Vieki was a child, his father told him that the queen's teeth were actually the spirits of warriors who had fallen in the queen's defense, their bravery earning them the privilege of guarding her for all eternity. Vieki had eventually learned the truth, but the memory remained, and though they might not be spirits, none except for those in the highest precincts of the maze and the order of sacrifice knew much about the teeth, how they were chosen and trained, where in the great palace they were housed, or even any of their names. A drunken commander of sacrifices had once told Vieki that the queen's elite guards surrendered their tongues to the knife during the ceremony when they donned their sacred helms of white witchwood. What a world it must have been when witchwood was so plentiful, Vieki thought as he passed between the rows of silent, helmeted sentries. Little of it still grew, and the sacred groves were now all but empty. Only the queen herself remains undying and unchanged. Everything else that belongs to the people falls away, grows slack, crumbles to dust. As he reached the end of the corridor, the door there opened, though none of the guards had moved and no one stood behind. Vieki stepped across the threshold, back into space and light. Faces. They were the first thing he saw, spread across every wall of the vast chamber and stretched across its ceiling as well. Huge faces, some staring nobly, some grimacing in agony, and every face belonged to the same person. Vieki had seen those features 1,000 times on monuments and murals. He knew them as well as those of his own family. It was Druki, the White Prince, the Queen's martyred son, who stared at him from all directions. Most of the portraits rendered in Srinyedu, a sacred weaving art that the Hikedaya had brought with them from the garden, though even the tile floor displayed different moments of Druki's foreshortened life. In the middle of the chamber, under the eyes of all those weeping, suffering Drukis, a spherical filigree frame surrounded a massive bed, both supported by a single plinth of black stone. And at the center of the bed, like an egg waiting on a nest, sat the silver-masked form of Utuku herself. Vieki was in the queen's own state bedchamber. Shocked, nearly witless by this realization, he dropped to his knees so quickly that he hurt himself against the hard floor, then pressed his head down on his hands in a pose of utter subjugation. He waited, eyes closed, but when someone finally spoke, the voice was not the queen's. "Greetings, High Magister Vieki. You are welcomed into the presence of the Mother of the People." Still face down, Vieki clenched his teeth. He knew those harsh tones all too well, and he did not like hearing them now. What was Akinabi doing here, alone of all the queen's ministers? "Her Majesty speaks, and we all obey," Vieki replied carefully. "Her Majesty spoke, and I obeyed." "Rise, Magister," said the Lord of Song. "No need for excessive ceremony. The queen does not wish it." "All thanks to the Mother of the People," he said, "and thanks to you for your welcome as well, Lord Akinabi." Vieki climbed to his feet, but still avoided looking too directly at the slender, shrouded white figure on the great bed. The High Magister of all singers made an easier, if more unpleasant, object for his attention. "You may address the queen," Akinabi instructed him, as though Vieki were some new minted acolyte. "You are permitted." It was all Vieki could do to turn toward his ruler, though he still could not gaze at her directly. His heart was racing like a stone bounding downhill. He had been elevated to High Magister during her long sleep and had never met her face to face. He had not thought he would be so overwhelmed by the queen's presence, but every childhood story, every bit of his people's long history under her rule, had suddenly risen inside him like a flood and swept away his other thoughts. What did it matter what he believed or intended? Viecki's entire existence belonged to the mind behind that shining, imperturbable silver mask. His life was utterly hers. How could it ever be otherwise? Still, he could not help noticing that the mother of all seemed a surprisingly small figure in the great bed, with its spherical canopy of filigreed witchwood. Despite its great size, the canopy was as delicate as fine jewelry, as boldly beautiful as a ring of ice around the moon. Viecki realized, after a little discreet study, that it was meant to resemble the porous casing around a witchwood kernel. And by that shape, he then realized, the canopy announced that the queen herself was the Ke-In, the holy witchwood seed from which everything else sprang, the beginning of the Hikedaya people, as well as the source of all their race's gifts. Small wonder this was where she held audiences with her servitors. That seed of all growth, the ageless queen, reclined on cushions in the center of the bed, her lower half covered by blankets. As always, Utuku wore mourning colors, gown and gloves and hooded cloak of icy white. But the eyes that stared at him from the holes in her shining mask were as dark as the emptiness between stars. She was staring at him, Viecki abruptly realized, and he was staring back at the mother of the people. Horrified by this accidental effrontery, he pressed his forehead against the tiles once more. "I offer the garden 1,000 thanks every day that you have returned to us, Majesty." An ivory mantis in a cage on the queen's nightstand turned its head at Viecki's sudden movement, then resumed cleaning itself. The silence stretched. At last he looked up, stilling the urge to blurt out more praise and more thanks, because that would suggest weakness or guilt, both bad things to show before the queen. At last Utuku nodded, a tiny dip of the head that was the first movement he had seen from her. Her words, when they came, were not spoken from her mouth, but leaped directly into his thoughts, like molten metal poured into his ears, abrupt, shocking, and painful. "When you walk long enough in the wastelands of sleep," the queen said, "you discover that the stars are eyes." Viecki had no idea what her words meant. "Yes, O mother of all." "The queen is still not entirely well after her long sleep, Magister Viecki." Akinabi's harsh voice sounded more amused than anything else, but as always with the eldest, whether the queen, the lord of song, or one of their shrinking number of peers from the earliest years after arriving here from the garden, it was impossible to guess what was hidden by the masks they all wore. Where the queen's features were forever hidden behind smooth silver, Akinabi concealed his face behind a wrinkled, nearly translucent tissue of pale leather, covered all over with tiny silvery runes, the whole stitched directly to the Lord of Song's own skin at the sides, mouth, and the holes for the eyes. Whispered rumors said his mask had been the living face of one of Akinabi's rivals. "With the help of my singers, the mother of the people is recovering swiftly from her great exertions in the war of return. May she live forever in glory," Akinabi continued. "But the welfare of our race cannot wait for the queen's full health, so neither will she. She wishes me to speak to you about the projects your builders have begun in the lower levels." I am honored to make my report to our beloved monarch," Viecki said, with a small revival of confidence. If the queen wanted to know about his work, Perhaps this was not his day to be punished after all. As High Magister Akinabi can confirm, Great Queen, we are expanding the city on Nakiga's lower levels to make room for all the new slaves and half-blood workers. He spoke with a certain satisfaction. He and his order had worked hard for their queen and their people during her long sleep. 200 of my builders lead the effort, commanding 1,000 mortals and almost half that number of Tanukadaya, carrymen, delvers, and others. We will finish in time for Druki's day. Enough, said Akinabi abruptly. All this detail is meaningless, because the Queen commands the work to stop now. For a moment, Vieki could draw no breath. But we, he began. Do you dispute with the Queen, Magister? No, never. I would not dream of it, he said, struggling to find words. But so much work has already been done. That is unimportant, Magister Vieki, declared the Lord of Song. The Mother of All has different employment in mind for you and your order. Vieki watched his most important undertaking as High Magister, the greatest source of his pride, crumble away in a moment, as though some foolish apprentice had struck at the wrong flaw in a stone facing. Of course, he said after a pause to collect his startled thoughts, our lives are hers, always. Queen Ituku is pleased to hear that, said Akinabi, because while our monarch was deep in the Ketaindra, some of her nobles made decisions that are rightly reserved to the Mother of All alone. Rebuilding the old city outside the mountain gates, for instance, or taking mortals as concubines simply to create more children, more half-blood children. Vieki felt an icy fist close on his heart. In fact, Her Majesty was astonished to discover all that had changed during her Indra. Akinabi went on, his voice carefully pitched to show his contempt for any who would try to alter the Queen's will. Things never done since the 8 ships landed had been ordered in her name while she slept. Yes, Magister, our Queen is unhappy, very unhappy, especially with any nobles who made these decisions while claiming the good of all as their reason, but in fact to benefit their own bodily lust and greed. Of course, the Lord of Song himself had been involved in every decision he now recited, but Akinabi had not lived to be the Queen's oldest and most powerful courtier by taking the blame for mistakes. Vieki was beginning to believe his execution might be the purpose of the audience after all. So does Akinabi intend to sacrifice me to preserve his own life, with Soja his unwitting excuse? But if I am given to the Hamaka torturers, I know things about the Lord of Song himself that Akinabi might not wish the Queen to hear. Could he only be warning me then? Might he even be reminding me, the thought was bizarre but compelling, that we have common cause, a need to protect each other's secrets now the Queen is awake? In the midst of so much strangeness, this seemed perhaps the oddest idea of all, that Vieki might be forced into permanent alliance with the Lord of Song. His old master Yarike had been right. There was no stranger mistress than power. Thus, Magister, said Akinabi sharply, you can see why, with so many other unwanted changes revealed to our beloved mistress upon her awakening, the Queen does not wish to see her order of builders laboring for the greater comfort of slaves. Our race will not dwindle without them, or the half-breeds that treacherous nobles have forced upon us. The only thing our beloved queen has not decided is whether some of these mistakes were honest ones, or whether they were all attacks on her sovereignty. Do you grasp this, High Magister?" "Of course," Vieki said. "I am grateful that she has shared her thoughts with an object as humble as myself." "Good. And the Queen wishes you to summon back those builders who are working to shore up the old walls as well. All your order will be given new labors." This was even more surprising than ending the expansion of the slave quarters. The old walls and their guard towers were some of Nakiga's best defenses against the mortals, and all of them were badly in need of repair. "I am not certain I understand," he said carefully. "Do we speak of the walls around Greater Nakiga, the walls that surround our old city and territory outside the mountain? Because while our queen slept, the murdering Northmen won their way to our very doorstep, precisely because those walls were in disrepair. But now we have almost made them safe again." "You waste time, just as your workers waste efforts on those useless walls, builder." Akinabi pronounced the order's name with scorn. "The Queen says we no longer need to protect ourselves from the mortals." Vieki was astonished. We do not?" "No." The singer's voice grew harsher. "Soon the mortals will need to protect themselves from us instead. The most recent war of return is not over, but this audience nearly is." Akinabi spread his gloved hands in a signal that demanded attention, but Vieki was so stunned by his words that he could not have spoken if he wished. "The Queen commands that all building in the lower levels and at the outer walls of Nakiga must stop. You will see to that personally, Magister Vieki. Later you will receive word of what new works your order will undertake. Is that understood?" It did not appear he was going to die, or at least not at this moment, but beyond that Vieki could scarcely grasp what he had just been told. Was this a plot of Akinabi's to snatch even more power? Did the magician only pass along the Queen's wishes? Did Utuku truly mean to go to war with the mortals again? Or did he somehow press his own ideas in her name? Akinabi was subtle beyond Vieki's understanding, but surely the Lord of Song knew how hopeless such a war would be. Even with the new generation of half-breed warriors, the Hikedaya were still vastly outnumbered by the Northmen on their borders, let alone the rest of the mortals and all their ugly wasps' nest cities scattered across the known world. "I understand," was all he said out loud. "I will do whatever my queen wishes, as always, and I thank her and the sacred garden for her confidence in me." "One last thing that our beloved mother of all wishes to make clear," declared the master of the singers. "From now on, the Queen commands that all mortal breeding women will be kept in the lower level pens with the rest of the slaves, unless needed, and then returned there afterward. Do you hear this, High Magister?" Vieki could only nod. "Good. The Queen's confidence in her noble ministers, like her love for her people," said Akinabi, "is wonderfully deep, but not endless." A door opened in the wall. Akinabi glanced at it, then back to Vieki. The meaning was clear. Vieki bowed and said, "We all sleep until the Queen wakes us," then performed his rituals of leave-taking before backing out of the vast white bedchamber. Outside, his thoughts as disordered as if he had taken a bad fall, it was all he could do not to stumble down the palace stairs and corridors like a drunkard. He could make no sense out of what had just occurred. Did the queen truly know what was happening, or did she still wander in dream while only seeming to have wakened? Was Akhenabi an enemy or an unlikely ally? And was Vieki really meant to send his favorite, Soja, out of his household entirely? Most disturbing of all, what on earth could the Lord of Song have meant by saying, "The war of return is not over"? Were those merely words meant to inspire? Then why abandon the work on the outermost walls? Vieki had feared many things from this audience, but had not imagined confusion as its main product. His household guards and his secretary were waiting for him outside the palace gatehouse. Yeman could have no idea what had happened during his audience, but recognized that his master's thoughts should not be interrupted, so he accompanied Vieki all the way back to the residence in silence. Neither did he ask any questions when they were finally through the doors of the house itself, because Vieki left them all suddenly and without further orders, shut himself in his study, and latched the door behind him. His wife Kimabu could not rouse him when she was preparing to go to bed. Vieki told her loudly and angrily to go away. And much later, when Soja knocked softly at the study door and called to him, the mother of his child received no answer at all. Chapter 6. An Aversion to Widows. Even several days after they had departed Hernus Adharc, the queen was still angry. Spring was coming on quickly, even as they traveled farther north. The snow reduced to patches upon the open meadows, in treetops, and on the upper slopes of the hills. The breeze carried warm hints of grass and flowering things. It all should have made for a pleasant ride, but Miriamel could not shift the mood that had seized her. "Your Majesty looks a bit fierce," her husband said. "Frightening, a lesser man might even call it." Simon was only trying to amuse her, she knew, but she was not in the mood. "If you must be told, I am still furious with that preening, giggling bitch Tillith." "Then you think she is a real danger?" Simon's look said he truly wanted to know. Mary felt a sudden wash of gratitude that she had found such a man, one who cared what she thought because he trusted her and loved her, not because of the crown on her head. Could I rule with any other? I cannot imagine such a world. If she were merely some chattering magpie of a courtier Hugh was betting, no, I would not, she told him. But she has him wrapped around her finger. And you heard what Eolair said. Witchcraft! Simon frowned. The two of them were riding a short distance behind the vanguard. For once they had the chance to speak privately. "Perhaps, but even so, don't be so quick to put all the blame on her," he said. "Hugh has changed since I first knew him, and not for the better." "Doubtless. But you didn't speak with her as much as I did, although not for the lack of the woman trying to get you to notice her." Simon frowned. "Do you think so?" "Think so? Blessed Liege, she was all but rubbing her bosom against your arm when they showed us around, sliding against you like a cat in heat." "I did not notice." "You don't convince me. How could any man fail to notice that woman's breasts? She was all but carrying them around on a cushion and calling them the crown jewels." Simon grinned and for a moment was a boy again. "Well, then, you're right, my dearest. I did notice. It embarrassed me because I knew you were looking. I promise you, I care nothing." "That is not the point. Don't be thick." "Ah, wife, you still retain your power to charm me." "Stop. I won't be put off by your good mood. That woman frightens me. Even Inawan, gentle Queen Inawan, calls her a danger. She is trying to raise demons, as Pyrates did." Both of them had almost met death at the Red Priest's hands. She knew Simon would not pass over it lightly. Yes, I heard everything Eolair had to say." Simon shook his head. "But we already have plenty of other problems, my dear. And Hernistir may be under the High Ward, but they are also a kingdom in their own right. What should we do? Seize the king's mistress and put her on trial for trying to raise demons? Adenite rulers passing judgment on pagan nobility for witchcraft? Many of the Hernistiri are already chafing at being ruled by foreign Adenites. We might as well send in the questioners of the Sacred College." "Don't blind yourself, Simon," she said, more harshly than she intended. "Not everyone means well, as you do. You are too naive sometimes." "Please don't treat me like a child, Mary." For the first time her husband's equable mood soured. "Don't instruct me as if I was still a scullion, not after all these years." After that they rode for a while in silence. She was sorry to have scolded him, but not enough to apologize. Her husband's inclination to trust was part of the reason she still loved him so powerfully, but that didn't mean she was wrong. Miriamel had already conceived a deep dislike of Hugh's intended before Eolair had told them of his conversation with Queen Inawan. Certainly Lady Tillith's easy familiarity, as if Miriamel, a queen herself and the daughter and granddaughter of kings, were nothing more elevated than an elder sister, had set her teeth on edge. But the woman also seemed amused by everything going on around her, not like Miriamel's dear friend Rona, who genuinely could not help finding things funny, but in the superior way of someone who treasured a secret that everyone else would be shocked to know. Hearing about Inawan's fears had only solidified Miriamel's own concerns. Still, Simon was right about one thing. The high throne had many other problems, more tangible and more pressing. The horrible mess of the Northern Shipping Alliance's near war with the old meddler Count Streawa's daughter, the Countess of Perdruin, had the potential to throw trade into chaos up and down Ostenard, to name only one. But as she thought of such things, Mary found a core of sadness inside herself that had little to do with the affairs of state. "It was hard, being away from home on his birthday," she said, the first words either she or Simon had spoken in some time. "I did not expect it to be so hard after all this time, but it was." Her husband accepted the offered peace. "For me too, my dear. I sometimes feel like a cat." He saw her look and smiled sadly. "I mean, old Shem, the groom, used to say that he had to watch the stable cats carefully because if they had a small spite, a rat bite, or wound from another cat's claws, all would seem well and healed on the outside, but the wound would still be festering under the skin. Sometimes it would kill them weeks later when they seemed to have been long past it. Now that's a lovely, reassuring thought." He flushed. I meant only that grief, that sometimes we have not healed as well as we thought, my love." She saw that she was doing it again, biting at him when she most needed their old companionship, the thing that bound them together from the very beginning, as surely as the love they later came to feel. The subject of John Josua especially brought it out in her, as though her husband somehow bore the blame for that agonizing loss, instead of being another victim. "I'm sorry. You're right. It is hard sometimes. I thought it would be easier as the years went on. I suppose most of the time it is. But when it isn't, I try to remember all the good that came from his life, cut short though it was. I remind myself of the good things we still have, Morgan and Lilia. Do you count the widow, too? He smiled, but there was a pained twist to it. Idella is the mother of our grandchildren, and I don't think she is as dreadful as you sometimes paint her. John Josua should not have married so young, and he should not have married her. He loved her. No one could talk him out of it, Mary, you know that. But we were his mother and father. We should have... This time she swallowed the words before they could come out, then violently expelled her breath. All the saints give me strength. I cannot bear to hear myself. She bent forward in the saddle and ran her fingers through her horse's mane, trying to distract herself. She saw Eolair riding a short distance away, close to them now, but not too close. Everything seems sad or frightening to me today, she told her husband. Is Grimner, John Josua's birthday, and that mad, rude performance in Hernistir. He who treated us like unimportant old relatives, and spending 3 days with that witch he's going to marry only made it worse. Demons or no demons, that Tillith probably killed her husband, you know. People certainly think so. People think many things. Often they are wrong. This time Simon's smile looked a bit foxy. Perhaps you simply have an aversion to widows. She glared, but she knew it was only a jest. There is Eolair. Ask him to tell you again what he thinks of her, and what Queen Inawin thinks. She said it loudly enough that the hand of the high throne looked over to them, his expression carefully empty. Did you call me, Majesty? You have been riding beside us for a good while, good Count, she said. I can see you are waiting for us to stop talking. I do not want to trouble your Majesties or interrupt your conversation. Call it saving us from ourselves, then, said the king. Miri and I are both out of sorts. Come, ride here beside us and tell us what's on your mind. Eolair looked at Miri, who nodded. Very well, then, he said. I have had a messenger from Hernisadhart just now. Passavali's dispatch came after we had left, so Hugh sent it on by fast rider. Very kind of him, said Simon flatly. Eolair was the last man in Ostenard to miss something simply because it was unspoken. Majesties, I still do not know what King Hugh was thinking to keep you waiting at the gate, he said. I apologize again on behalf of all my countrymen for such strange, discourteous behavior. Queen Inawin was surprised and shamed that the king kept you waiting so long outside the walls. She told me so. Simon waved his hand. Inawin is kind. She always was. I am not too troubled. Men are men, whether king or kitchen worker, as I should know better than anyone. Hugh may be a bit overexcited by his own grandeur, as well as by the prospect of marriage. As for Lady Tillith, Simon had just noticed the halves of the broken seal that bound the folded papers in Eolair's hand. Well, enough of her for now. What does Lord Chancellor Passavales have to say? Do you not want to read it yourself, Majesty? I know you too well to think you would have broken that seal if the letter was not addressed to you, good Eolair. And I also know you will have read it carefully and probably more than once, because you are someone who never has time for clean hands, as my old taskmistress Rachel the Dragon used to say. So please tell us what is on Passavales' mind, or at least the things we need to know. Miriamel nodded. When they were young, and the fact of their sudden power was like a waking dream, Simon had tried to be all things to all people, unable to refuse a favor or to turn his back on a cry of need. Miriamel, raised in her father's courts in Merrimond and then the Hayhold, had already known that a monarch who could not stand aloof sometimes was a miserable monarch indeed. It had taken years and the elevation of several old trusted friends to the most important positions in court, but her too kind husband had finally learned he could not be all things to all people. And I think we're going to stop there because next we start into a whole long thing from Passivalis and discussions about the Countess of Perdruin and all kinds of complicated things like that, which are better off starting again tomorrow, which is what I'm going to do. Strangely enough, here it is. I am Saturday night, and I am reading, and yet tomorrow is Sunday, and I will be reading again. Isn't that outrageous and original of me? No, it's what I've been doing now for about 3 or 4 years. Anyway, it is now, once again, 1 o'clock in the morning. So magically, time has stopped going forward. But that will not be the case for me. Despite daylight savings time, I will be continuing to go forward. But in this case, forward will be sort of more or less toward bed. So with that, I say thank you so much for joining me. As always, it's a huge pleasure to have been able to spend time with you. I hope some of you will be able to return tomorrow night. Failing that you will see this on the next one on YouTube, or that you're seeing this one now on YouTube or something like that. Thanks as always to Chris Fab for putting those up. If you get a chance, and you're watching one of those, throw a like on it. Subscribe, something just to get Chris's channel a little more attention. Not that we're probably ever going to have enough people to monetize it or anything, but what the heck, right? Represent, babe. Represent. So anyway, that's me. I'm out of here. I'll be back at 7 p.m. Remember, it is now daylight savings time, so we are now on a slightly different time zone than Europe is. Once again, we're supposed to get rid of this within the next few years, but who the heck knows whether that will ever happen or not. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Be good to yourselves. Be good to your friends and loved ones and your neighbors. And together we will all get through this thing called life, brothers and sisters. Peace. Peace out.